And one. Hi there, John Moore here, and I am a teacher of shamanism from Maine. I also practice shamanism as a healer, and I practice it for my own personal spiritual development. So today I'm going to do a video called Shamanism Explained. And what I really want to do is take a beginner's view at shamanism. If you have no knowledge of shamanism before you watch this video, I hope that you'll learn something out of it. I have a lot of videos on my channel that are, a little bit more advanced or cover very specific topics. So I'm going to take a very broad and beginner's overview to shamanism and explain it to you if you're just curious. I also want to tell you if if shamanism is something that interests you, how you might get started in finding out more and learning more about shamanism and perhaps learning some of the main practices of shamanism. So let's begin. Shamanism, I refer to shamanism as the world's oldest spiritual technology. People have been practicing shamanism for as long as we can tell, which is way back into the Neolithic era, the caveman days. We see cave paintings. And before that, we don't really have records of what human beings were doing, but it's fair to say that it's probably, this is probably a set of practices that go back to the beginning of humanity. There's lots of theories about this, about how religiosity and the ability for symbolic thought really were a part of what makes humans human. So we don't know how old it is. It is ancient. And what shamanism is that it encompasses kind of a worldview. So there are some ideas that are particularly shamanistic and some practices. So people who we call shamans have some things in common that they believe and some things in common that they do. Now, shamanism not only is extremely old, thousands and thousands, maybe tens of thousands, who knows, maybe hundreds of thousands of years old. But it existed everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean everywhere there were humans. So we see shamanic cultures, which are, individual cultures that have shamanic practices as a part of the culture, or they have people who play the role of what we call shamans. We see that in the Americas, North, South, and Central America. We see it in all parts of Africa. We see it in all parts of Asia. We see it throughout Europe. Now, you might think that shamanism came out of Siberia or Mongolia or that part of the world. And the reason for that is that there are still shamanic cultures there. There's still people who the main spiritual practice is shamanism. And also the word came into English from the German and the Russian and the Dutch back in the 1600s. And there was a Dutch guy that we know that went to Russia as an envoy and spent time in Siberia. And he observed the Tungus tribe, or the Tungsik people, who were practicing shamanism, and they had the word shaman. And in their language, it can mean one who dreams, one who sees clearly, one who sees in the dark. I like all of those. I like all of those descriptions for that word. But the word shaman doesn't originate there. As far as we can tell, it exists also in slightly different forms, as languages do. In Sanskrit, in Pali, which is the language the Buddha spoke, in different forms of Chinese, and Semitic languages. So there are roots of it in even some Hebrew languages, and Akkadian and Assyrian, and all of those languages have that version. And in every culture where that word, or the root of that word, exists, it basically means a spiritual functionary. In some places it means a priest. In some places it means somebody who works with sacred oils. In some places it means what we think of today as a shaman. So it is a borrowed word into English. It exists in lots of other languages, German and French and Spanish and Chinese and Pali and Sanskrit and et cetera, et cetera. And, very specifically, we're going to talk about the word in English as an English word, because borrowed words, when we use them long enough, we've adapted them. If you look in the dictionary, you can look up the word shaman and it will have, there will be a definition there. I'm not sure if it's correct, but it will be a definition there. So for me and for a lot of people who may study shamans and shamanism from an anthropological perspective, and there was a seminal work written in the 50s, and then it has been released many, many, many versions. And I'm probably mispronouncing this person's first name, but it's Mircea Eliade, and it's called Shamanism. It's called Shamanism, and the subtitle is something like Ecstatic States of Reality or something along those lines. But you don't have to read that book. It is extremely academic. It's meant for anthropologists. It's about yay thick, and it will give you more information than you want to know. But it was important. It was seminal in sort of defining how we use the word shaman, particularly in English. So there are three components. There are three main components to what we call shamanic practice. And I'm going to talk about the worldview separately. So this is what shamans do. So shamans use altered states of consciousness. That's where this word ecstatic comes from. It just doesn't mean in the way that we think of ecstasy, maybe as, sexual or pleasurable or whatever. It literally means altered states of consciousness, going outside the realms of ordinary consciousness. So shamans alter their state of consciousness. They might do this through taking plant medicines or mushrooms. That's actually rarer than the other way, which is the way I use, which is to use rhythm. So they're drumming or rattles or sticks or instruments or singing or dancing. We can drive a trance or an altered state of consciousness through those means and do what shamans do. So we use altered states of consciousness. The second component is travel in non-ordinary states of reality or non-ordinary realms. So in shamanism and all shamanic cultures, they recognize many worlds, not just the physical world that we live in, but there are spiritual worlds. And they're roughly divided into the upper world, the lower world, and the middle world. And I do have videos specifically about those, so I won't go into too much detail there. But I will say this, that it's not about heaven, hell, and earth. That's not it at all. Those are patriarchal, Christian, or whatever, what have you, religious overlays onto those things. And we can talk about how when Christianity came in, particularly into Europe, it decided to crush paganism, destroyed pagan temples, destroyed pagan libraries, destroyed pagan books, forbid pagan practices, and turned a lot of pagan gods into the devil and demons, and turned the underworld into hell, the place you go when you're punished. So pagans didn't want to go there anymore, even though it was the place where you go when you die. So those, I just want to make a distinction that those are not related. The concept of hell is not related to the concept of the underworld in any way, shape, or form. The underworld is, or the lower world, I should say, rather than the underworld. The lower world is a beautiful place and there's no torture and there's no demons and what have you. But you can check out my other videos on the shamanic worlds if you're interested in that. And I'll probably do separate videos on each of the shamanic worlds. So that's component number 2. So we have component number 1, altered states of consciousness. Component number 2, travel in non-ordinary worlds. We call that non-ordinary reality. When you are in your physical body, using your physical senses to perceive the world around you, we call that ordinary reality. Okay, just to differentiate a little bit. The third component, and this is extremely important, and this will tie into the shamanic worldview as well, is that shamans always work with helping spirits. We work with power animals. Some people confuse that with what are called spirit animals, but we work with power animals, which are animal spirits. We work with what some people might perceive as gods and goddesses and angels and ancestors and all kinds of spirits. And we do that to get information, to affect healing, to do all kinds of work. And this is the main practice of shamanism, which is called journeying. Shamanic journeying is altering your state of consciousness to be able to leave your body, or to have a part of you leave your body, to perceive these other worlds and to communicate with and work with helping spirits, and to potentially bring back information or healing or power or any of those things. So, because shamanism exists in cultures all over the world, it is also viewed through the lens or the filter of the particular culture that it comes from. So, South American shamans, for example, tribes particularly along the Amazon basin, will have, will journey. Maybe they'll use plant medicine to do that, and they will communicate with their helping spirits. But there will be things that they do that are decidedly different than any other culture, because there's cultural overlay, the environment is different, all of these things. So they'll have songs and prayers that'll be different. They will have different rules and taboos and dogma. And this is really where shamanism and religion are kind of the same thing. Shamanism itself isn't a religion because globally there is no dogma, no holy books, no doctrine, no oaths to swear, no real clergy. The shaman, again, is a spiritual functionary and may play that role. There's no hierarchical organizations. There's no holy books, any of that stuff. So it doesn't really fit into what I would call a religion. So there will be all these cultural differences, but there is a worldview. There's this practice that we call journeying, but there's also this worldview that all shamans have in common, and you kind of have to if you are doing shamanism. And so the shamanistic worldview, or the shaman's worldview, is that of animism. And I do have a video talking about how shamanism and animism are related. So at the core, if you are to believe that there are spirits in the natural world, that's a very animistic belief. So if you don't know what animism is, it is the belief in spirits. So at least the belief that all living things have spirits. So animals and plants, things like that have fungi, have spirits. And many animists extend that into things that we would consider non-living, such as stones, mountains, rivers, your car. From my perspective, I like to say that everything is a spirit. So everything that you can perceive as an individual entity is a spirit. It all has a connection back to single source, which is divinity or God or the universe or what have you. And then it comes and it differentiates out. But without that underlying spirit, nothing would exist. We wouldn't be able to perceive it. We wouldn't be able to, interact with it. It just wouldn't have physical form. Now, there are a lot of spirits that don't have physical form. When you think about ghosts or angels or that sort of thing, they don't have mass. They don't have matter. They don't have, atoms and molecules and that sort of thing. So they kind of can do things like shape change and shift between worlds and that sort of thing because they're not really tied into the physical world. That doesn't make them better than we are, and it doesn't make us better than they are. We are just kind of, we having physical bodies, at least for now, until we die, we have an advantage in that we can act very easily upon the physical world. I can pick up an object, such as this pen from my desk, and put it down. For a spirit to do that would be very, very difficult. I have seen things moved by spirit, and I was not hallucinating, I promise, because there were many other people who witnessed it, the same thing I witnessed. But it is very difficult, and that's why you don't see it very often, that things moving around on their own. I realize there are paranormal researchers that run into that from time to time, but it's not an everyday thing where me just picking this up and holding it up, I can interact with the physical world. Most spirits cannot, or they have very limited access to the physical world. It's very difficult. It requires a lot of energy for them to do that, or they live kind of in a frequency that's farther away from physical reality. I like to look at the different worlds sort of as like frequencies on a radio spectrum. As I'm sitting in this room, there are all kinds of radio waves traveling through the air from radio stations, from TV stations, from my laptop talking to the router in the other room, from the sun. There's electromagnetic energy passing through me. And all of these frequencies exist in this room at the same time, in the same space. And sometimes they interfere with each other, and sometimes they do not interfere with each other. Sometimes I can perceive them because I can perceive physical light, which is electromagnetic energy, when it reflects off a surface into my eyes. And sometimes I cannot because I'm not attuned to those frequencies, or I don't have the senses to perceive those frequencies. So that is, electromagnetism, right? The radio waves. So spirit is very much the same, where all of these spiritual worlds kind of exist in the same space at the same time. And what shamans do through altering their consciousness and the ability to travel in spirit form, they are able to tune themselves to different frequencies of reality and sort of pick up on these different worlds that exist here. That's my take on it. That's my explanation. I realize that's a metaphor. I realize that's not a literal explanation of what's happening, but that's probably as close as I can explain it in a way that I have language for. Without experiencing it, it's tough to know. So now I want to talk about how you would learn more about shamanism, or how you would learn shamanism if it's something you're interested in pursuing. If you don't live in a shamanic culture, meaning you don't live in an indigenous culture where shamans are chosen or it's inherited by, from passed down through families, the title, or, the ability, or those sorts of things. You live like I do, maybe like in a, Western sort of disconnected society, then you can pursue shamanism. You can find a teacher. I highly recommend that. I don't recommend learning shamanism from a book or from recordings. You can learn some things, and you can learn, like from this video, you can learn some factual information. You might even be able to learn how to journey on a very basic level, and that's okay. You can take an online class, or you can do this, a couple day class is totally fine. But really, if you're, and it's a great way. The nice thing about that is you can dip your toes in and decide if it's a path for you. I did that and got sucked in, and it's become my life's pursuit. So, you can take a couple day class, you can do maybe an online class and learn how to journey. The only issue with that is if you don't have live interaction with the teacher, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and there's a lot of ways that you can miss things and not be corrected, and not having the ability to ask a teacher questions is really detrimental. That's why I like teaching live, and I like teaching one-on-one, or even if I'm teaching online, I'm teaching live. And I probably will do some recorded classes along the line, but give people the opportunity for Q&A and to have have some troubleshooting and problem solving. Because even when I do intro classes, like a 2-day intro class, people have lots of questions. People have, run into things. There are always unique questions in every class I teach. So one of the things I love about teaching is that everybody's different, and everybody comes in with different experience, and everybody has a slightly different experience of shamanism. So you can learn shamanism. Some people I don't know why, but some people will tell you that you can't learn shamanism if you do not have aren't descended from shamans or whatever. They'll put some arbitrary rules on who can learn shamanic practice. And none of that appears to be true for me. Um, you know, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is we all come from shamans. Every single person on this earth has ancestors who lived in a shamanic culture. I would almost 100% say without exception. At some point in my ancestral history, my ancestors were not Christian. And they come from, even the ones that came from Northern Europe were practicing shamanism. We know, we have records of that. The ones who came from the British Isles, same thing. It doesn't matter where you came from. The cave paintings in France and Spain have depictions of shamanic states of consciousness. Early Christian art has, paintings of psychedelic mushrooms in it, talking about Middle Ages stuff. So even as people were adopting Christianity and stamping out paganism, for some reason, these psychedelic mushrooms were pretty important to them. Bears further examination. So, so you can go learn shamanism. It is your birthright. Shamanism is for everyone, and not. That's a weird phrase. Shamanism. There's nothing that says you don't have a right to learn shamanism or you don't have the ability to learn shamanism. It's not a path for everyone. It's not something that everybody has the constitution for. Shamanism is not an easy path. I frequently say it is not all rainbows, unicorns, and chocolate cake. It can be extremely difficult. There's a lot of personal development that has to happen as you follow down this path. There is a lot of your stuff will come up and force you to look at it. There's a lot of shadow work you should be doing. And if you ever want to work with other people, there's a tremendous amount to learn. It's a huge commitment. But that being said, you can learn the basic practice of journeying. I very frequently, when I have students who meet with me one-on-one, I can teach them that skill in about an hour or less. I have every single one of my individual students have had success with the method that I use for teaching this, because we all have the ability to do this. Everybody has the ability to make those brainwave patterns that we need to journey, to separate part of our spirit and travel in non-ordinary reality. We all have helping spirits. So if anybody tells you that shamanism isn't for anyone, that's their take on it. That's an opinion, but it's not based on anything. It's not based on birthright or ability or, there's one thing if you're going to go steal somebody's culture from them, that's not okay. That's cultural appropriation. If I were to dress up like a Mongolian shaman and go hang a shingle out and pretend like I was a Mongolian shaman, that would be wrong. And I wouldn't do that. But I am practicing in the way that my ancestors practiced, in the way that everybody's ancestors practice. And I work with my ancestral helping spirits, not somebody else's ancestral helping spirits. And I work with my power animal, not anybody else's power animal. So it's really not an issue. And if you're interested in shamanism, fantastic. You can check me out, and I have a lot of resources both through YouTube. I host a podcast. I have an app which is free online. You can go to my website. There's a tremendous amount of written material and links to everything else. I'm not proselytizing. Again, I don't think this is a path for everyone. I'm not trying to convince anybody to go down this path. But if you feel drawn to this path or you feel like you're interested in it, seek out the best information that you can. And there is a lot of it out there. And there are some very good teachers out there. I'm not just bragging, talking about myself. I'm not saying I'm the best teacher in the world. There are lots of very good teachers out there that you can learn from. And I hope to provide many more resources online for people who are just, curious and want to learn more about shamanism. And so I hope this has been helpful. I hope you stay happy and healthy, and subscribe to my channel, and I'm going to talk to you real soon.